Hello, my name is Chris and I'm a Group Commander in Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue Service. My main area of work is responsible for the Fire Service's community engagement and specialist risk management services. If I sit here in silence, you will notice that I'm wearing a uniform of a senior officer. I look formal by wearing a tie and my rank markings tell people who I am. I might communicate to you that I'm a person with power and authority. Wick et al. 1967 says that leaders cannot not communicate, and this is relevant to the situation I've been dealing with over the past month. In mid-October, Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue Service was issued an accelerated cause of concern by His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services, the HMI. This is indicating systemic issues with the service's approach to preventing fires and that there may be a safety risk to the public. And this is a very big deal for the service, as it suggests to the public and its staff that it is morally and ethically failing in its corporate responsibility to keep the public safe. I've been leading the development of an action plan in response to this letter as a senior leader. I've been using this as an opportunity to observe the executive leadership's communication response, that of the organisation, and to develop my own. And here's my story of what I found and have developed. Looking at KSB K20, I believe that the service can be split into essentially two parts, and they can be as different as night and day. There's the operational part, that responds to the emergencies, and the everyday business part, functions like HR, training, finance and so on. The night part, the operational element, is by far the largest section of the business. This diagram is adapted from the Shannon and Weaver model of communication. The information source transmits via sender to be decoded at its destination by its receiver, and this is a very fire service approach to communication. There's the expectation that the leader will deliver quality input and that will result in a unified understanding and output from its followers. If a leader is a good communicator, the quality of the message will be understood, with the receiver being only a passive participant. And this is a very fire service approach because from the perspective of the operational side, this does appear to be very successful. We do save lives. The commander at a fire issues instructions and the followers respond. Communications at an operational emergency is a very command and control model, as described by Maffra and Boehm 2008. Information moves from the top down in a tell and respond style as we seek to bring control and order to that very real VUCA environment of a life-threatening emergency. And what we do is, with this operational success, we translate that as being the most effective approach and then apply it by all levels of management and to all situations, like the receipt of the HMI letter. When the service received the letter, a single all-staff email was sent from the executive within the first 7 days. I have observed that since that time there's been no other email or an attempt by the executive to communicate outside of that command and control model until the action plan was produced around 5 to 6 weeks later. Through not communicating, the executive is communicating to its staff. It has made the assumption that a single message has been transmitted and everyone will decode and understand it. And that's enough. But how did we get here? Now, I recognise that my leadership development is broadly the same as that of my colleagues. We're all 20-year plus serving leaders within the same organisation. Sheen 2009 argues that culture is the pattern of shared tacit assumptions learned by the group. My evaluation is that we assume that as good leaders we are able to communicate in a linear process from the top down. The issue, however, is that Rubin and Giolotti 2016 says that within that linear communication model, a failure of communication can be viewed as a failure of communication of leadership itself. And this is a perfectly logical hypothesis to the decades of orthodox leadership development and the focus on our operational response as the primary measure for success, and often is the only measure of success. And this is a cultural issue that I needed a great level of understanding to make my work more inclusive and more high performing. To create an inclusive culture, KSBS 14, I needed to understand what culture I was operating within, so I analysed it using the Sheen 2009 Corporate Survival Guide by looking at the 3 levels: the espoused values, the artefacts and the underlying assumptions. And through that I've determined that we are an order profile of culture which is focused on respect, structure and shared norms. Leaders emphasise shared procedures and customs, and this overemphasis on rules and traditions can reduce individualism and limits organisational agility. People play by the rules and want to fit in. Our communication strategy and our leadership development and the way we interact with each other reaffirms that order culture, and the order culture reaffirms our communication strategy, our leadership development and the way we interact with each other. We seek to rationalise and bring control to something that is predictably unpredictable, and this is presenting a barrier to staff not only engaging with their leaders but also engaging with meaning. Research by Mather and Bohm 2008 indicates that command top-down communication profile is outperformed by all other profiles, and that without exception an open profile where information moves up, down and across in an inclusive way outperforms all others. To enable and create a culture that is open, inclusive and high-performing requires that we move away from that traditional procedure and custom, especially if we want this action plan to be a success. So for KSB S14 and S16, I started developing a plan to enable transparent communication and opportunity of speech and feeling for all those involved, with the goal to look at the root issues highlighted by the HMI. Mather and Bohm 2008 again suggests that knowing plus feeling equals doing, and this is how I wanted to approach my work. So I began by setting up 5 interdepartmental workshops from the day and night sides of the business, and I facilitated the conversations with each workshop having around 12 to 20 people each, including an all-female team within an organisation that is disproportionately male. The only agenda item being the HMI CFRS letter. Stacey 2012 argues that group meetings with a mechanistic agenda may sideline or cover over complex and uncertain issues that with a very loose agenda might be conducive to reflexive inquiry, and that participation and inclusion within the group will persuade people to motivation. And this is often contrary to the power of authority and coercive motivation that is often used within a service, the power of my rank and the tell and do culture. The CRPD says that when people believe that a team is safe at interpersonal risk taking and that they can speak up or take action without being embarrassed, rejected or punished, research suggests that this may have a moderate to large positive impact on performance. So it is important for me as a leader to create and re-emphasise psychological safety and the well-being of those teams involved, especially during the workshops, and this would improve the quality of engagement and encourage difference, as there were likely teams and team members who have not felt heard. KSB S14 and S16 again, I set about setting the house rules for each workshop, which were all conducted over a period of 2 weeks. These were that we listen, respect differences in opinion, it's okay not to know, and whatever is said in the room will not be attributable to any one person. I did share my very real feelings about the HMI letter and my understanding, and it was to demonstrate that emotion and well-being and vulnerability are okay in this space. I set accountability for each of my 5 direct team reports to attend the workshops with me, and that they should document the conversations as they progress to help shape our meaning. After each workshop, we as a risk prevention team then collectively interpreted each of our documented meanings. One person from the team was then accountable for facilitating our own team conversation about the group workshops, and then collating those into an overall shared meaning. So by the end of those 5 workshops, we documented the individual team workshop meanings, and then as a team created 5 overall thematic group meanings. KSB S21, this process enabled me and my team to understand the organisational issues that needed to be addressed for the action plan, and it created the opportunity for organisational communication about the HMI letter through me setting the agenda, managing the meaning and creating sense making. And this approach was an interactional model of communication, of inclusive interactivity, similar to SRAM 1954. I feel it may have even started to have developed towards Rubin and Stewart 2016 systems model approach, by not only being able to communicate our reality, but to start to reshape it and create it. And it's here where there's an interesting dynamic between the night and the day, the mechanistic and the organic. My traditional view of the service is much like that of a fire appliance, as a mechanistic thing that can be deployed to perform a function of leadership, to be able to achieve that positive resolution. It's become clear to me, however, that it's not always inclusive, and it does not always hit. And it's to be expected. Rogers 2021 posits that from a traditional viewpoint, managers do view an organisation as a thing in order to seek control. Moles and Norman 2022 also argues that managerialism within the public sector is a quasi-scientific discipline aiming to rationalise through science-based approaches. Herf 2017 further argues that managers' attempts to rationalise using a scientific approach break the world into smaller parts, and what they actually do is distance those parts from the whole. And what they appear to be arguing is that traditional management and leadership discourse is based on a linear, scientific method of cause and effect, input and output, Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and in an attempt to bring about control through breaking the problem into smaller parts, we actually distance ourselves. And this is certainly what I've seen with the communication approach by the executive. And it's also one of the root causes of the HMI letter. A rather different point of view I've now taken and developed is aligned to the Stacey 2012 theory of complex responsive processes, which reaffirms the argument of dominant management discourse based on certainty and linear relationships. A complex responsive system like that of a murmuration of Stalin's is predictably unpredictable, with the organisation consisting of a large group of agents interacting with each other according to their own principles. This service, like its murmuration, is a social entity. It's made up of hundreds of individuals, with no one individual or group able to direct or control the behaviour of the system. And the butterfly effect, because in small actions have potentially big outcomes. We have no way of knowing what impact HMI outcome might have, or the lack of communication gesture from the executive to its staff, or my workshops. I think we perhaps recognise that the communication gesture from the executive has been inadequate. But what would then be adequate? Stacey 2012 says that when a CEO communicates with their staff, the meaning does not lie simply in the communication, but in the response to it. Meaning emerges from the response to a gesture. If work has meaning, people take it seriously. When a dog snarls at another, how does it respond? The HMI have explicitly stated that the prevention of fires is not a priority, and observing the gesture from the executive and the response by the staff, I can see that the organisation has responded by feeling disappointed and directionless. I've analysed the individual and group workshop meanings, and I've also asked AI to summarise and analyse the same meanings. So I started with a mechanistic communication and cultural approach to the HMI letter, K20. Then engaged with staff in an interactive and inclusive way to develop the shared meaning, S14, S16 and S21. We reflected together as a team to understand what that means for us, S14 and S16. Then asked the machine, what does it mean for the organisation and its people? So I've carried this thing full circle. It's been hugely insightful that the items highlighted by the people during the workshops are procedural and cultural. People have not seen, read or understood the strategic documents, and they don't know how to deliver good, but there appears to be a lack of feeling. The all-female team has said that they feel unheard, and the all-staff email was interpreted as, you have to do this. The AR summary about staff said that people feel confused, uncertain, disengaged, isolated and undervalued. And so, although the workshops are a success in enabling a different cultural approach, there are decades of shared learning and culture change, and this might be the start of a new approach for the organisation. It certainly is for me and my teams at S21. I've looked to develop the action plan differently to what might have been my usual approach of command and control, with broadly two arguments having shaped my thinking and application, and I've used these as a basis of my observation and reflection. On one side, there are a number of frameworks or steps that can be used to bring structure and control in an attempt to rationalise the complex. Frameworks that give names to cultures, or 5 steps of the action equation, the Math of Boehm 2008, or the 8 principles of being a communicative leader, Johansson, Miller and Hamrin 2014. I've used elements of each of these throughout the process, and I've used many managerial tools over the years, and so have my other colleagues, and yet, as a service, this is where we are. Another set of arguments posits that people and organisations are unpredictable, whilst leaders seek to bring control through the use of quasi-scientific linear tools, and they might bring some competence, but failure being interpreted through the implementation of the tool, rather than the tool itself being wrong. And I find these arguments by Ralph Stacey and Chris Miles especially compelling as a new way of looking at the nature of communication, my organisation, the people and culture, and I'm fully embracing this as a new approach. I commit myself to change. My communication approach has been through the workshops, and this has been to humanise it and look for meaning. And I think this has been very successful in building the action plan, but also changing the way we do things. I've placed the person at the very centre of my work. Perez, Russian and Painter 2019's explanation of the African philosophy of Ubuntu, I am because we are, speaks very loudly to me. These 5 workshops are the start of reshaping our meaning of organisation. Desmond Tutu said, I am human, therefore I belong, I participate, I share. And this is the way I now approach my leadership, my communication and my teams. And it's certainly reshaping my meaning. Thank you.